Hello everyone, welcome to Zoomies. This is the long format video of a video I already did about raw feeding diets or meat-based diets as compared to more commercial diets and compared to maybe ready-made meals. So this is the long format video. This will be delving into a full discussion, what I call full consultation on everything you need to know, everything summarized into a way that you can understand it. You have all the information. It's not for me to make a decision for you. This is purely an informational session so that you have all the facts before making your own decision. So why do people feed raw feed diets? This is a very, very big point. If you could go basically anywhere on the internet and find a plethora of advertisements, recommendations, links to websites, pictures, statements, it's everywhere. They've made such massive claims, and I think that should be one of the key points that we should focus on today. The biggest concern is that raw feed diets are marketed as a way superior alternative to commercial or more common pelleted diets or processed diets. And this is all despite the fact that there's actually very limited recognized scientific information about raw feeding. Just like anything else in the modern era, the spread of misinformation that is governed by social media is actually insane. However, they do succeed in their attempt to try and get to persuade people to buy into the idea of raw feeding with whatever claims they make. This is a very dangerous process because essentially what is happening is that companies and people are using buzzwords and using what sounds like scientific information and scientific terminology, using that knowledge or that information and playing on you as the consumer, on your frustration or on your needs or on your concerns, which would then lead them to a level where they've already got you captive within this idea of this is the better option that you haven't considered yet and that this will resolve all your issues, which I think is a very conniving way of approaching it. Instead of basing it in actual evidence-based science, they rather play on emotion. Because one of the biggest points they bring up is that they'll always talk about this is the way that nature intended. This is the way that dogs in the wild would have lived. This is how wolves eat. And it's actually very quick to just go down there to say that wolves and dogs are not related. Wolves are not ancestors of dogs. Wolves and dogs share a common ancestor. Dogs have been domesticated for around 20 to 40,000 years. It's been such a long while that they've diverged away from their natural habitat, let's call it that, to being domesticated and living amongst humans, that you physically cannot make the argument that dogs would have done X, Y, or Z in nature, because they aren't an integral part of nature. Just like us as humans, it's not like to say, oh, we as humans in nature would have done X, Y, or Z. Way too much time has passed since us being part of nature. Way too many physiological changes have happened, and way too many digestive changes have happened. The biggest one basically being the ability to digest starch. Wolves do not have the ability to digest starch, but they don't need that ability. They don't need to digest starch. They can just eat carcasses. They eat whole organs. That is what their diet revolves around, whereas dogs have the enzyme that starts getting produced the moment they start consuming food that helps to break down starch. So I know the one thing, this is a very important point that I discussed in my short form video, where I basically say the following. A main argument they make is that look at how healthy wolves are, and this is how wolves survive. Why can't dogs survive the same? So the thing is, with wolves, just like most other coniferous animals in nature, do the following. It is not about the survival of the individual. It's about the survival of the species. Okay, so it doesn't matter how long the animal survives. That's irrelevant. It is how long the species or the group, the pack, whatever you want to call it, how long they survive. So it basically comes to food consumption, reproduction, repeat. It's about the survival of the species. I think the life expectancy of wolves is around like 8 to 12 years or something like that. And I think that's being generous if nothing else kind of kills them before that. Whereas dogs, we want dogs to live 20 plus years if we can. With dogs, it is not about the survival of the species. That is on us. That is purely about the survival of the individual. And the moment you break it away from a group and onto an individual, diet plays such a crucial role, a balanced diet. plays such a crucial role. Take humans, for example. There are so few doctors or medical professionals that will advise you to stick to a diet that is outside the norm of humans. Yes, there are outliers. There are some people that respond extremely well to carnivore diets, keto diets, gluten-free diets, of course, but the norm is a balanced diet. The same applies for animals as well. So the potential benefits or claims that are being made by raw food diets are the following: improvement in the coat, skin, energy, behavioral issues. It helps to improve their immunity. It helps to reduce calculus or tartar buildup on teeth. It has increased digestibility, and apparently the chewing behavior of dogs gets promoted. With all of these claims, there is no scientific literature or actually recognized scientific literature that approves any of these claims. With the reduction in calculus or plaque buildup or tartar buildup on teeth, that boils down to them actually gnawing on bones most of the time. So one of two things happen. Either you give your dog whole bones, or bones get ground up into a meal, and that gets put into the diet. The bone meal will not help your dogs with calculus. Trust me, it is not superior to any other form of calculus prevention or plaque buildup prevention. And feeding your dog whole bones is a big no-no from any veterinarian. The potential risks definitely outweigh the potential benefits that you could get from feeding bones. In my consultation room, I would advise people to say that the time of feeding your dog's bones is over. They give unnecessary risk. There's no real advantage, or you could not make the argument that there isn't something better. Any alternative to trying to prevent calculus buildup, such as feeding your dog carrots, brushing your dog's teeth, taking your dog to the veterinarian to have regular dental scale and polish procedures done, those are way superior and have way less potential side effects than giving your dog's bones. On that note, there is also no evidence to suggest that raw feeding exclusively will have any sort of impact on your dog's immunity and skin and coat condition. When it comes to allergies is such a complicated consultation to have with people, and the solution is almost never to give your dog raw feed diet. I have to make this disclaimer and say that sure, there might be one dog in a million that gets resolved by feeding raw feed. But I think making the argument that the food made the difference, you could easily say that the dog had a food allergy and that kind of maybe any other change in the diet would have had a similar effect, not just feeding raw feed diet. So doing a food trial on a more balanced food is I think a way better piece of advice to give. So keeping all of these things in mind, there are obviously potential risks when it comes to raw feeding diet. The most prominent ones is basically nutrient deficiencies. From what I could see on the internet, they are completely unbalanced diets. They tend to be a mixture of random vegetables, some poorly cut meats, even if they are high quality meats and provide sufficient fats, and bone meal. Some might add probiotics, prebiotics, some might add fruits. It comes down to balance. Formulated processed diets are balanced diets that have been formulated by board-registered, recognized, qualified, experienced nutritionists, not just one, not two, probably a board, have been put through scientific studies, have been checked over and over, have been proven to be balanced. Whereas raw feeding diets, you could basically mix up anything into a pot, put it into a sausage, put it in the deep freezer, and market it as raw feeding diet. There are no guarantees, and the potential to running into any sort of deficiency and that being a risk to your animal is way too high, and an unnecessary risk in my opinion. So probably the biggest risk of feeding raw feed diet is what's called microbial contamination. And I think the two biggest ones that get buzzed is Salmonella and E. coli. So there have been studies that have proven that the Salmonella and E. coli contamination in raw feed diets are way higher than processed feed diets. So if you have any sort of young children, old people, or any immune compromised person staying with you in the house, this is an unnecessary risk to those people. Okay, the chances of you picking up those infections that can be lethal is extremely unnecessary and so much higher than just feeding your dog processed diets. Plus, it comes with other caveats of needing to decontaminate, not wash, decontaminate feeding bowls, ensuring that food is stored adequately at not sub-zero temperatures, minus 10 degrees Celsius storage in the freezers. They need to be thawed out. So it becomes such a hassle that it doesn't become practical to do them. So what some people have resorted to is kind of making their own diets, and they would make the assumption that, oh, once the food is cooked, it should be safer. And yes, this tends to be true. This can be true. Heat does decontaminate food to a quite a large extent, but it doesn't ensure that all contaminants are removed. That being said, I have to say that processed diets also do not guarantee to be free of contaminants. It's so easy for them to pick up Salmonella and E. coli, and the studies actually suggested that all raw feeding, processed diets, and home cooked diets all run the risk of Salmonella and E. coli. So it's not just exclusive to one. It just comes down to what are the risks, how high is the risk with raw feeding versus home cooked versus commercial feeding, and home cooked diets. The same arguments can be made with home cooked diets in terms of if you just kind of use your own knowledge, unlikely that it will be balanced, unlikely that you are doing the right thing. If you do have your diet formulated with a nutritionist that is balanced and that know what they're doing, then I would actually make the argument to say that maybe a home cooked meal is superior to even a processed kibble diet, is superior to raw feeding diet. Obviously with the caveat of being formulated correctly. The only hassle obviously comes in that it's very inconvenient to make and can actually be quite expensive. Needing to buy all the raw ingredients, make them yourself, process it beforehand, not storing them, kind of feeding it fresh daily. If you're up for the challenge, then I think that would actually be better than feeding your dog processed diets. I'm just going to emphasize again, if it has been balanced by a board certified, recognized, experienced nutritionist, not someone claiming to be those things. Although some dogs do seem to respond really well on raw feed diets, and I've actually seen this in my consultation where we struggle with certain issues with dogs, and the moment you move over to a raw feed diet, those issues seem to go away. That would be amazing, but those are isolated incidences. Most dogs I would not recommend going onto raw feed diets, and I would advise vets not to make those recommendations until we have more information, more acknowledged, recognized scientific studies that prove that raw feeding is superior to kibble diet. I would say stick to kibble diet. Even with anecdotal information, you could make good assumptions and you can make informed decisions based on your own experiences where you're from. But one thing that I always advise clients are the following: do you trust the source or the company that you get your raw feeding products from? Are they balanced, as I emphasized earlier? And do you store it correctly? And do you handle any sort of cutlery or bowls correctly when feeding raw feed diets? If you manage those points, you are minimizing risk, just knowing that risk is still unnecessarily high. Something else that I would advise during raw feeding diets, I would advise people to deworm their dogs frequently, which maybe everyone should be doing anyway, because worms can also be an unnecessary health risk to your animals, and remember, can be zoonotic meaning being transmissible to humans, same as the E. coli and Salmonella, being a risk to you and your family. So in conclusion, basically what I would recommend is the following. I would weigh out the pros and cons with each individual situation. Have you really tried to tackle any sort of issue, be it a health issue, an allergic issue, a monetary issue, whatever? Have you tried approaching that in a different way with the aid and the guide of your veterinarian or your health provider for your animal, to try and find alternatives that maybe solve those issues before relying on raw meat-based diets purely from an emotional or frustrational point of view? I would say, if your animal is on any sort of medication, any sort of description-based diet, I would stick with those. Those have been actually proven, studied, and shown over and over again, even compared to raw feed diets, to be superior every single time with what they do. But emphasis on the prescription diets. So these are for allergic skin issues, low-fat diets for dogs with pancreatitis, and dogs with chronic gastrointestinal issues. But what I would do is I would weigh out each individual situation, the pros versus the cons, making sure that you make informed decisions, knowing what the risks are, how they would be mitigated or at least minimized, and then approaching it accordingly. Make sure your animal is healthy. One thing does not have to happen in isolation. Remember, your animal can be put on a raw feed diet, for example, and can be mixed with a kibble diet if that allowed. I would also most probably add in a multivitamin that's more balanced for your animal. And on top of that, regular vet visits are still a necessity. I would still advise to have calculus on the teeth removed. I would still do them, keeping up with vaccinations. If they're on chronic medications, managing those correctly. changing over to raw feed diet and making the claim that this will resolve all your issues is a unfounded, unrealistic statement to make. Even for processed diets, even when we as veterinarians recommend a certain dietary change or medication, well, I would hope that veterinarians say this is not the end all be all. This will only make it better. If we're lucky, 50 to 90% better. But it's unlikely that any sort of change will remove most issues that happen to dogs. There are exceptions, but most issues that happen in dogs. So I hope this video gave you all the information you needed. I hope I tackled every point that gets brought up. For the time being, I would say from a veterinarian perspective, it is difficult to recommend a raw feed diet based on the lack of evidence that there is, but we will see what the future holds. We never know. I'll link the short formatted video in the description below if you want to go watch that and support the channel. And I hope you enjoyed this type of content. So leave me a like and click the bell icon down below and leave a comment down below if you have any questions. I really try to get to them. And until next time, cheers.